Spirituality refers to certain kinds of activity through which a person seeks meaning, especially a search from the sacred. It may also refer to personal growth, blissful experience, or an encounter with one's own inner dimension. Etymology. The term spirit means animating a vital principle in man and animals. It is derived from the Old French esprit, which comes from the Latin word spiritus and is related to spire. In the Vulgate, the Latin word spiritus is used to translate the Greek pneuma and Hebrew ruah. The term spiritual matters concerning the spirit is derived from Old French spiritual, which is derived from Latin spiritualus, which comes from spiritus or spirit. The term spirituality is derived from Middle French spiritualité, from late Latin spiritualitatem, which is also derived from Latin spiritualus. Definition. There is no single, widely agreed definition of spirituality. According to Wyman, the traditional meaning of spirituality is a process of reformation which aims to recover the original shape of man, the image of God. To accomplish this, the reformation is oriented at a mold which represents the original shape. In Judaism, the Torah; in Christianity, there is Christ; for Buddhism, Buddha; and in Islam, Muhammad. Quote, in modern times, the emphasis is on subjective experience incorporating personal growth, a transformation, usually in a context separate from organized religious institutions. Hartman and Orpers suggest that modern spirituality is a blend of humanistic psychology, mystical and esoteric traditions, and Eastern religions. Spirituality is sometimes associated with philosophical, social, or political movements such as liberalism, feminist theology, and green politics. It plays an important role in contemporary discussions of issues in mental health, managing substance abuse, marital functioning, parenting, and coping. Development of the meaning of spirituality. Classical, medieval and early modern periods. Words translatable as spirituality first began to arise in the 5th century and only entered common use toward the end of the Middle Ages. In a biblical context, the term means being animated by God, to be driven by the Holy Spirit, as opposed to a life which rejects this influence. In the 11th century, this meaning changed. Spirituality began to denote the mental aspect of life, as opposed to the material and sensual aspects of life, the ecclesiastical sphere of light against the dark world of matter. In the 13th century, spirituality acquired a social and psychological meaning. Socially, it denoted the territory of the clergy, the ecclesiastical against the temporary possessions, the ecclesiastical against the secular authority, the clerical class against the secular class. Psychologically, it denoted the realm of the inner life, the purity of motives, affections, intentions, inner dispositions, the psychology of the spiritual life, the analysis of the feelings. In the 17th and 18th century, a distinction was made between higher and lower forms of spirituality. A spiritual man is one who is Christian more abundantly and deeper than others. The word was also associated with mysticism and quietism, and acquired a negative meaning. Modern spirituality, transcendentalism and Unitarian Universalism. Ralph Waldo Emerson was a pioneer of the idea of spirituality as a distinct field. He was one of the major figures in transcendentalism, an early 19th century liberal Protestant movement, which was rooted in English and German Romanticism, the biblical criticism of Herder and Schleiermacher, the skepticism of Hume, and Neoplatonism. The Transcendentalists emphasized an intuitive, experiential approach of religion. Following Schleiermacher, an individual's intuition of truth was taken as the criterion for truth. In the late 18th and early 19th century, the first translations of Hindu texts appeared, which were also read by the Transcendentalists, and influenced influenced the thinking. They also endorsed Universalist and Unitarianist ideas, leading to Unitarian Universalism, the idea that there must be truth in other religions as well, since a loving God would redeem all living beings, not just Christians. Neo-Vedanta. An important influence on Western spirituality was Neo-Vedanta, also called Neo-Hinduism and Hindu Universalism, a modern interpretation of Hinduism which developed in response to Western colonialism and Orientalism. It aims to present Hinduism as a homogenized ideal of Hinduism, with Advaita Vedanta as its central doctrine. Due to the colonization of Asia by the Western world, since the 19th century, an exchange of ideas has been taking place between the Western world and Asia, which also influenced Western religiosity. Unitarianism, and the idea of universalism, was brought to India by missionaries, and had a major influence on Neo-Hinduism via Ram Mohan Roy's Brahmo Samaj and Brahmoism. Roy attempted to modernize and reform Hinduism for the idea of universalism. This universalism was further popularized and brought back to the West as Neo-Vedanta by Swami Vivekananda. Theosophy, Anthroposophy, and the perennial philosophy. Another major influence on modern spirituality was the Theosophical Society, which searched for secret teachings in Asian religions. It has been influential on modernist streams in several Asian religions, notably Neo-Vedanta, the revival of Theravada Buddhism, and Buddhist modernism, which have taken over modern Western notions of personal experience and universalism and integrated them in the religious concepts. A second, related influence was Anthroposophy, whose founder, Rudolf Steiner, was particularly interested in developing a genuine Western spirituality, and in the ways that such a spirituality could transform practical institutions such as education, agriculture, and medicine. The influence of Asian traditions on Western modern spirituality was also furthered by the perennial philosophy, whose main proponent, Aldous Huxley, was deeply influenced by Vivekananda's Neo-Vedanta and Universalism, and the spread of social welfare, education and mass travel after World War II. Important early 20th century Western writers who studied the phenomenon of spirituality, and the works include William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience, and Rudolf Otto, especially the idea of the holy. James' notions of spiritual experience had a further influence on the modernist streams in Asian traditions, making them even further recognizable for a Western audience. Spiritual but not religious. After the Second World War, spirituality and religion became disconnected, and spirituality became more oriented on subjective experience, instead of attempts to place the self within a broader ontological context. A new discourse developed, in which psychology, mystical and esoteric traditions and Eastern religions are being blended, to reach the true self by self-disclosure, free expression and meditation. The distinction between the spiritual and the religious became more common in the popular mind during the late 20th century with the rise of secularism and the advent of the New Age movement. Authors such as Chris Griscom and Shirley MacLaine explored it in numerous ways in the books. Paul Healy's noted the development within New Age circles of what he called seminar spirituality, structured offerings complementing consumer choice with spiritual options, among other factors. Declining membership of organized religions and the growth of secularism in the Western world have given rise to this broader view of spirituality, even the secular are finding use for spiritual beliefs. In his books, Michael Mammers makes the case for integrating Eastern spiritual knowledge with Western rational thought. The term spiritual is now frequently used in contexts in which the term religious was formerly employed. Both theists and atheists have criticized this development. Spiritual care in healthcare professions. In the healthcare professions there is growing interest in spiritual care, to complement the medical technical approaches and improve the outcomes of medical treatments. For example, Puchalski et al., who argue for compassionate systems of care, offering the following definition of spirituality in the operationalization of spiritual care. Spirituality is a dynamic and intrinsic aspect of humanity through which persons seek ultimate meaning, purpose, and transcendence, and experience relationship to self, family, others, community, society, nature, and the significant sacred. Spirituality is expressed through beliefs, values, traditions, and practices. Traditional spirituality, Abrahamic faiths, Judaism. Rabbinic Judaism has been the mainstream form of Judaism since the 6th century CE, after the codification of the Talmud. It is characterized by the belief that the written Torah cannot be correctly interpreted without reference to the oral Torah and by the voluminous literature specifying what behavior is sanctioned by the law. Judaism knows a variety of religious observances, ethical rules, prayers, religious clothing, holidays, Shabbat, pilgrimages, Torah reading, dietary laws. Kabbalah is an esoteric method, discipline and school of thought of Judaism. Its definition varies according to the tradition and aims of those following it, from its religious origin as an integral part of Judaism, to its later Christian, New Age, or occultist syncretic adaptations. Kabbalah is a set of esoteric teachings meant to explain the relationship between an unchanging, eternal and mysterious Ein Sof and the mortal and finite universe. While it is heavily used by some denominations, it is not a religious denomination in itself. Inside Judaism, it forms the foundations of mystical religious interpretation. Outside Judaism, its scriptures are read outside the traditional canons of organized religion. Kabbalah seeks to define the nature of the universe and the human being, the nature and purpose of existence, and various other ontological questions. It also presents methods to aid understanding of these concepts and to thereby attain spiritual realization. Hasidic Judaism, meaning piety, is a branch of Orthodox Judaism that promotes spirituality through the popularization and internalization of Jewish mysticism as the fundamental aspect of the faith. It was founded in 18th century Eastern Europe by Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov as a reaction against overly legalistic Judaism. His example began the characteristic veneration of leadership in Hasidism as embodiments and intercessors of divinity for the followers. Opposite to this, Hasidic teachings cherished the sincerity and concealed holiness of the unlettered common folk, and their equality with the scholarly elite. The emphasis on the immanent divine presence in everything gave new value to prayer and deeds of kindness, alongside rabbinic supremacy of study, and replaced historical, mystical and ethical asceticism and admonishment with optimism, encouragement, and daily fervor. This populist emotional revival accompanied the elite ideal of nullification to paradoxical divine panentheism, through intellectual articulation of inner dimensions of mystical thought. Christianity. Catholic spirituality is the spiritual practice of living out a personal act of faith following the acceptance of faith. Although all Catholics are expected to pray together at Mass, there are many different forms of spirituality and private prayer which have developed over the centuries. Each of the major religious orders of the Catholic Church and other leg groupings have their own unique spirituality, its own way of approaching God in prayer and in living out the gospel. Christian mysticism refers to the development of mystical practices and theory within Christianity. It has often been connected to mystical theology, especially in the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox traditions. The attributes and means by which Christian mysticism is studied and practiced are varied and range from ecstatic visions of the soul's mystical union with God to simple prayerful contemplation of Holy Scripture. Progressive Christianity is a contemporary movement which seeks to remove the supernatural claims of the faith and replace them with the post-critical understanding of biblical spirituality based on historical and scientific research. It focuses on the lived experience of spirituality over historical dogmatic claims, and accepts that the faith is both true and a human construction, and that spiritual experiences are psychologically and neurally real and useful. Islam 5 Pillars. The pillars of Islam are 5 basic acts in Islam, considered obligatory for all believers. The Quran presents them as a framework for worship and a sign of commitment to the faith. They are the Shahada, daily prayers, almsgiving, fasting during Ramadan, and the pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in a lifetime. The Shia and Sunni sects both agree on the essential details for the performance of these acts. Sufism. The best-known form of Islamic mystic spirituality is the Sufi tradition, in which a spiritual master or PIR transmits spiritual discipline to students. Sufism or Tasawwuf is defined by its adherents as the inner, mystical dimension of Islam. A practitioner of this tradition is generally known as a Sufi. Sufis believe they are practicing ihsan as revealed by Gabriel to Muhammad. Worship and serve Allah as you are seeing him, and while you see him not yet truly he sees you. Sufis consider themselves as the original true proponents of this pure original form of Islam. They are strong adherents to the principle of tolerance, peace, and against any form of violence. The Sufi have suffered severe persecution by their coreligionist brothers, the Wahhabi and the Salafist. In 1843, the Sanusi Sufi were forced to flee Mecca and Medina and head to the Sudan and Libya. Classical Sufi scholars have defined Sufism as a science whose objective is the reparation of the heart and turning it away from all else but God. Alternatively, in the words of the Dakawi Sufi teacher Ahmad ibn Ajiba, a science through which one can know how to travel into the presence of the divine, purify one's inner self from filth, and beautify it with a variety of praiseworthy traits. Jihad. Jihad is a religious duty of Muslims. In Arabic, the word jihad translates as a noun meaning struggle. There are two commonly accepted meanings of jihad: an inner spiritual struggle and an outer physical struggle. The greater jihad is the inner struggle by a believer to fulfill his religious duties. This non-violent meaning is stressed by both Muslim and non-Muslim authors. Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, an 11th-century Islamic scholar, referenced a statement by the companion of Muhammad, Jabir ibn Abdallah, the Prophet, returned from one of his battles, and thereupon told us, "You have arrived with an excellent arrival. You have come from the lesser jihad to the greater jihad, the striving of a servant against his desires." Asian traditions. Buddhism. Buddhist practices are known as bhavana, which literally means development or cultivating or producing, in the sense of calling into existence. Quote, "It is an important concept in Buddhist praxis." The word bhavana normally appears in conjunction with another word, forming a compound phrase such as chitta bhavana or metta bhavana. When used on its own, bhavana signifies spiritual cultivation. Generally, various Buddhist paths to liberation developed throughout the ages. Best known as the Noble Eightfold Path, but others include the Bodhisattva path and Lamrim. Hinduism. Hinduism has no traditional ecclesiastical order, no centralized religious authorities, no governing body, no prophet nor any binding holy book. Hindus can choose to be polytheistic, pantheistic, monistic, or atheistic. Within this diffuse and open structure, spirituality in Hindu philosophy is an individual experience, and referred to as kaitrajna. It defines spiritual practice as one's journey towards moksha, awareness of self, the discovery of higher truths, true nature of reality, and a consciousness that is liberated and content. Four paths. Traditionally, Hinduism identifies three marga of spiritual practice, namely Jnana, the way of knowledge, Bhakti, the way of devotion, and Karma Yoga, the way of selfless action. In the 19th century, Vivekananda, in his Neo-Vedanta synthesis of Hinduism, added Raja Yoga, the way of contemplation and meditation, as a fourth way, calling all of them yoga. Jnana Marga is a path often assisted by a guru in one's spiritual practice. Bhakti Marga is a path of faith and devotion to deities. The spiritual practice often includes chanting, singing and music, such as in kirtans, in front of idols, or images of one or more deity, or a devotional symbol of the holy. Karma Marga is the path of one's work, where diligent practical work of arta becomes in itself a spiritual practice, and work in daily life is perfected as a form of spiritual liberation and not for its material rewards. Raja Marga is the path of cultivating necessary virtues, self-discipline, tapas, contemplation and self-reflection, sometimes with isolation and renunciation of the world, to a pinnacle state called samadhi. This state of samadhi has been compared to peak experience. There is a rigorous debate in Indian literature on relative merits of these theoretical spiritual practices. For example, Chandogyopanishad suggests that those who engage in ritualistic offerings to gods and priests will fail in the spiritual practice, while those who engage in tapas will succeed. Svetasuvartaropanishad suggests that a successful spiritual practice requires a longing for truth, but warns of becoming false ascetic who go through the mechanics of spiritual practice without meditating on the nature of self and universal truths in the practice of Hinduism, suggest modern-era scholars such as Vivekananda. The choice between the paths is up to the individual and a person's proclivities. Other scholars suggest that these Hindu spiritual practices are not mutually exclusive, but overlapping. These four paths of spirituality are also known in Hinduism outside India, such as in Balinese Hinduism, where it is called Chatur Marga. Schools and spirituality. Different schools of Hinduism encourage different spiritual practices. In Tantric school, for example, the spiritual practice has been referred to as sadhana. It involves initiation into the school, undergoing rituals, and achieving moksha liberation by experiencing union of cosmic polarities. The Hare Krishna school emphasizes Bhakti Yoga as spiritual practice. In Advaita Vedanta school, the spiritual practice emphasizes Jnana Yoga in stages, Samyasa, Sravana, Manana and Dhyana. Sikhism considers spiritual life and secular life to be intertwined in the sequel Tanshauung. The temporal world is part of the infinite reality and partakes of its characteristics. Guru Nanak described living an active, creative, and practical life of truthfulness, fidelity, self-control and purity as being higher than a purely contemplative life. The sixth Sikh Guru, Guru Hargobind, reaffirmed that the political, temporal and spiritual realms are mutually coexistent. According to the ninth Sikh Guru, Tegh Bahadur, the ideal Sikh should have both Shakti and Bhakti. This was developed into the concept of the Saint Soldier by the 10th Sikh Guru, Gobind Singh. According to Guru Nanak, the goal is to attain the attendant balance of separation, fusion, self-other, action-inaction, attachment-detachment. In the course of daily life, the polar opposite to a self-centered existence. Nanak talks further about the one God or Akal that permeates all life, and which must be seen with the inward eye, or the heart, of a human being. In Sikhism there is no dogma, priests, monastics or yogas. African spirituality. In some African contexts, spirituality is considered a belief system that guides the welfare of society and the people therein, and eradicates sources of unhappiness occasioned by evil.